My name is Mateo Rivera, and at 29 years old, I became the family failure. At least that's what they all believed. For 4 years, I built my craft-roasted coffee empire in secret, watching my annual revenue climb to 8 figures while my parents told everyone I was just figuring things out. Then came my sister Sophia's engagement dinner. I sat quietly as they dismissed my life until her fiancé Diego looked at me and whispered those words that made time stop. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of dreamers and doers. Growing up in Miami's vibrant little Havana meant expectations were always sky-high in. The Rivera family, my parents, Carmen and Luis Rivera, were pillars of the Cuban-American community. Mom, a celebrated chef who'd turned her street food cart into a chain of 3 restaurants, and Dad, a senior accountant at one of the city's biggest firms. From my earliest memories, everything was a competition, and my older sister, Sophia, was always winning. Why can't you be more like your sister? Became the soundtrack of my childhood. Sophia was 2 years older and seemingly perfect at everything. Valedictorian, debate captain, accepted to the University of Miami on a full scholarship. Meanwhile, I was the square peg, constantly hammered into a round hole. It wasn't that I was unintelligent. I just thought differently. While Sophia memorized recipes and balance sheets to perfection, I was constantly questioning flavors and imagining how things could taste better. My 5th grade teacher called me creatively disruptive. My father just called it being difficult. Mateo, focus. My mother would scold during our mandatory family study hours. Your sister has already perfected 3 new empanada fillings today. What have you accomplished? The truth was, while they forced me to study traditional subjects, I was secretly teaching myself to roast coffee beans. I built my first makeshift roaster in the garage at 12 and had created a signature blend by 15. None of this counted as achievement in the Rivera household. Hi. School was when the divide became unbridgeable. Sophia was accepted to an elite magnet program, while I remained at our local public school. Every family dinner became a report on Sophia's latest accomplishments with occasional awkward questions about why I was only getting B's in chemistry despite the expensive tutors. My one ally was my Tio Rafael, my mother's younger brother, and the family's other disappointment, who had chosen to become a street photographer rather than a chef or accountant. They'll never understand people like us, Mateo, he told me one afternoon while we sat in his cluttered studio. We see flavors where they see only the established recipe. That's not a flaw. It's a gift. When Sophia was accepted to the University of Miami, following in both our parents' footsteps, the celebration lasted for weeks. When I was accepted to a small culinary institute the following year, a school I had specifically chosen for its hands-on roasting and supply chain programs, the response was lukewarm. At least it's in Miami, my mother said with a sigh. Though a real university would have given you the connections you need. I lasted 1 semester at the institute before dropping out, which was the ultimate unforgivable sin in the Rivera family. The day I told them, my father actually walked out of the room. We've spent a fortune on your education, my mother said, her voice ice cold. What do you plan to do now? Work at a coffee shop? I have a job offer from a specialty roastery, I explained. The experience will be worth more than the degree. A roastery? My father scoffed when he returned. Those glorified garage projects that disappear in 6 months. This is the future you're choosing over a real education. No matter how I tried to explain the opportunity, they couldn't see past the lack of prestige, the absence of a degree. From that point forward, I became the cautionary tale, the example of potential wasted. At family gatherings, relatives would ask about me in hushed tones, and my parents would respond with vague statements about me finding my way. Sophia, meanwhile, completed her degree with honors, then earned an MBA before landing a prestigious position at a global food conglomerate. She became increasingly uncomfortable around me, as if my failure might somehow be contagious. The final straw came at my cousin's quinceañera when I was 22. I overheard my mother telling my tia Elena that they were so worried about Mateo, and at least we have Sophia to make us proud. That night, I made the decision to leave Miami. Entirely. I had been saving money from my roastery job and had built connections in the specialty coffee world. Portland was calling, and I needed to answer. "You're running away," my mother accused when I told them I was moving to Oregon. "I'm running toward something," I corrected her. "Something you can't see." My father shook his head. "When this Portland fantasy fails, don't expect us to bail you out." As I packed up my apartment, Tio Raphael was the only one who came to help. "You know what the difference is between you and the rest of the Riveras?" he asked, taping up a box of roasting equipment. "What? You're brave enough to fail on your own terms rather than succeed on someone else's." I left Miami with 2 duffels, a home roaster, and $3,000. In my family's eyes, I had cemented my status as the disappointment, the failure, the cautionary tale. Little did they know that this failure was actually the first step toward building something beyond any of their imaginations. Landing in Portland with just $3,000 to my name should have terrified me. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of freedom. For the first time, I could define success on my own terms without the Rivera family measuring stick constantly finding me too short. I rented a tiny studio in Southeast Portland, all I could afford, and took a job at a mid-sized specialty roastery as a production assistant. The pay was modest, but the learning opportunities were immense. My boss, Lena Chun, quickly became the mentor I had always needed. "You have a unique way of looking at flavor profiles," Lena told me after I'd redesigned an internal roasting process that saved the company thousands in wasted beans. "You don't just see what is, you see what could be." Unlike my family, Lena actually valued the way my mind worked. She gave me increasingly complex beans to experiment with and included me in cupping sessions with buyers despite my junior position. It was during one of these sessions 8 months after I started that the idea hit me. We were discussing the challenges of supply chain transparency, the ability of roasters to trace beans from farm to cup and prove ethical sourcing. The existing solutions were clunky, paper-based, and still required massive manual verification. What if we approached this from the other direction? I asked, sketching out a rough diagram on a napkin. Instead of trying to make these legacy systems talk to each other, what if we created a blockchain-based traceability layer that automatically verifies and standardizes the data regardless of source? The room fell silent. Then the head roaster said, "That would revolutionize specialty coffee if it were possible." "It is possible," I insisted. "I know how to build it." That night, I stayed up until 4 a.m. creating the prototype for what would eventually become BeanTrace, a coffee supply chain transparency platform that would transform the industry. For the next 6 months, I worked my day job and spent every evening and weekend refining my prototype. When I finally showed Lena my work, her reaction confirmed what I already knew. "This is groundbreaking, Mateo. You need to pursue this full-time." Quitting my job was terrifying, but I had saved enough to give myself 6 months of runway. I converted my tiny studio into an even tinier living space plus office, subsisting on instant noodles and cold brew while coding 18 hours a day. The breakthrough came when I presented my prototype at a small specialty coffee expo. A venture capitalist in attendance approached me afterward. "This solves $1 billion problem," she said bluntly. "I want to invest." 3 weeks later, I had $750,000 in seed funding and incorporated my company, Trace Coffee Collective. I decided to remain relatively anonymous, using only my initials, MR, in company materials and hiring a more experienced executive to be the public face for investor meetings. This was partly strategic, Latino. Founders statistically receive less funding, but also personal. I didn't want my family to find out about my success until I was ready to share it on my terms. The first year was brutal. I hired 3 employees and we worked out of a converted warehouse space in Northeast Portland. There were nights I slept on a beanbag rather than going home. There were moments I nearly gave up. But gradually, roaster by roaster, we began to gain traction. By the end of year 2, we had 25 employees and had raised another $5 million in series of funding. Our product was being used by 50 specialty roasters across the country, and we were starting to turn a profit. Year 3 brought explosive growth. Bean Trace was now being hailed as the solution. The specialty coffee industry had been waiting for. We expanded to 60. Employees moved to proper offices in the Pearl District, and I finally upgraded from my studio to a modest loft. Through it all, I maintained minimal contact with my family. Holiday phone calls and obligatory birthday texts were the extent of our communication. They never asked detailed questions about my work, apparently assuming I was still struggling at some insignificant coffee job. I never volunteered information, allowing them to maintain their narrative that I was the family failure. By year, for Trace Coffee Collective was generating $12 million in annual recurring revenue. We had contracts with over 300 roasters nationwide, had expanded to Mexico and Colombia, and employed over 100 people. Industry publications hailed Bean Trace as the innovation that finally solved supply chain transparency. I was now financially secure beyond anything I had imagined. Yet I still lived relatively modestly compared to my wealth. My focus was on the company, not on outward displays of success. The only luxury I allowed myself was a vintage espresso machine. Tio Raphael was the only family member who knew the truth. I had flown him out to Portland in year 2 and given him a tour of my roastery. I always knew you'd prove them wrong, he said, hugging me tightly. But you know you'll have to. Tell them eventually, right? When I'm ready, I replied. On my terms. As it turned out, fate had other plans for the big reveal. The invitation arrived on a Monday morning in early October. A thick ivory envelope with the Rivera family crest embossed on the back. Even before opening it, I knew it was something significant. My family never sent casual correspondence. Inside was a formal invitation to my sister Sophia's engagement dinner to be held at my parents' home in Coral Gables in 3 weeks. There was also a handwritten note from Sophia. It would mean a lot if you could be there, Mateo. It's been too long. I sat at my kitchen counter staring at the invitation as my cold brew grew warm. 4 years had passed since I had been in the same room as my entire family. Our interactions had been limited to brief phone calls and increasingly infrequent texts. The last time I had seen Sophia in person was a year ago when she had a business trip to Seattle. We had met for an awkward coffee where she spent most of the time talking about her career successes while asking vague questions about my work in coffee. My immediate instinct was to decline. I had a company to run, important meetings, scheduled deadlines looming. But something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps a lingering desire for family connection, made me hesitate. That evening, I called Tio Raphael. The prodigal son returns, he said when I told him about the invitation. Are you going to go? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me thinks it would be walking back into the lion's den. They have their narrative about me. Why subject myself to that again? Maybe it's time to change the narrative, he suggested gently. You're not the same person who left Miami 4 years ago. I'm not going back to announce my success like some sort of vindication tour, I said firmly. That's not what I'm suggesting, Raphael replied. But hiding your achievements indefinitely isn't healthy either. You've built something remarkable, Mateo. That's simply the truth. You don't need to flaunt it, but you shouldn't have to actively conceal it either. After our call, I sat on my balcony, watching the rain streak down over the Willamette River. Perhaps it was time to at least open the door to reconciliation, even if I was not ready to fully walk through it. The next day, I RSVP'd yes to the invitation and booked my flight to Miami. The 3 weeks before the trip passed in a blur of meetings and product launches. I intentionally overloaded my schedule, leaving little time to dwell on the upcoming family reunion. The night before my flight, I stood before my closet carefully, selecting what to pack. This seemingly simple task became unexpectedly loaded with meaning. My wardrobe now contained designer pieces I could easily afford, but wearing them would immediately signal my financial success. After much deliberation, I chose understated quality basics, nice enough to be appropriate for a formal family dinner, but nothing that screamed wealth or status. The flight from Portland to Miami gave me 5 hours to rehearse conversations in my head. How would I respond when asked about my work? How much was I willing to share? What would I say when they inevitably made dismissive comments about my career choices? As the plane began its descent into MIA, I gazed down at the familiar coastline and felt a complex mixture of emotions. Nostalgia, anxiety, and a strange sense of confidence that had been entirely absent when I left this city 4 years ago. I took an Uber from the airport, watching the familiar landmarks pass by my window. Miami had changed in small ways, new condos here and there, different murals occupying familiar walls, but its essential character remained unchanged. Unlike Portland's constant reinvention, Miami prided itself on vibrancy and tradition. Rather than staying with my parents, as would have been expected, I had booked a room at the Seta in South Beach. This small act of independence was important to me. I needed neutral territory, a place to retreat if things became too overwhelming. After checking in and freshening up, I received a text from Sophia. Looking forward to seeing you tonight. Parents are excited too. I doubted the truth of that last statement, but replied with a simple, looking forward to it too. See you at 7. At 6:45, I found myself standing outside my parents' coral pink stucco home, the house where I had grown up. I paused on the driveway, taking in the familiar facade, with its perfectly maintained hibiscus and polished brass fixtures. For years ago, I had left this house feeling like a failure. Now I returned as the founder of a $12 million company. Yet my hand still trembled slightly as I reached for the doorbell. The door swung open to reveal my father, Luis Rivera, looking exactly as I remembered. Him, tall, imposing, and impeccably dressed in a guayabera. Despite this being a family dinner, Mijo, he said, his tone formal as he leaned in for a brief, stiff hug. You made it. Hi, Dad, I replied, stepping into the foyer that smelled of citrus polish and my mother's signature café con leche. Thanks for having me. Everyone is in the living room, he said, already turning away. Your mother has been cooking all day. I followed him through the familiar hallway, past the wall of family photographs that chronicled our lives. I noticed my sister's side of the display had continued to grow: graduation photos, professional headshots, vacation pictures, while mine had remained frozen in time, ending with my high school graduation. The living room fell momentarily silent as I entered. My mother rose from her seat, her expression a carefully composed mask of politeness. Mateo, Mijo, she said, embracing me briefly. How was your flight? It was fine, Mom, I replied. You look well. This is Diego, Sophia said, stepping forward with a tall, warm-eyed man at her side. My future brother-in-law Diego Morales was not what I had expected. Based on my sister's past boyfriends and our family social circle, I had anticipated someone from a similar background, old money, traditionally successful, perhaps another MBA or executive. Instead, Diego had a genuine smile and a firm handshake. I've heard so much about you, he said, and surprisingly he sounded sincere. All bad, I assume. I joked immediately, regretting the self-deprecating comment when I saw my mother's slight frown. Not at all, Diego replied smoothly. Sophia mentioned you work in coffee in Portland. That must be exciting. Before I could respond, my mother interrupted. Let me introduce you to everyone else. You remember your Tio Javier and Tia Elena, of course, and cousin Isabella and her husband Carlos. The next 15 minutes were a blur of greetings with extended family members. Some genuinely pleased to see me, others clearly curious about the failure returned from exile. Tio Rafael arrived last, giving me a knowing wink as he embraced me. Warmly, you look sharp, Sabrino, he whispered. Success suits you. The dinner setting was classic Carmen Rivera, formal china, crystal glasses, silver candelabras, and elaborate tropical flower arrangements. As a child, I had always found these formal dinners suffocating. Now they seemed like theater, an elaborate performance of wealth and tradition. As we took our seats, I found myself between Tio Rafael and my father's cousin, Miguel, a boring real estate developer who had always treated me with condescending politeness. Diego and Sophia sat directly across from me with my parents at either end of the long table. So, Mateo, Tio Javier called down the table as the first course was served. Sophia tells us you're still in Oregon making a go of it in coffee. Are you? The way he said coffee made it sound like I was selling cafecito from a street cart. Yes, I replied simply. I work in specialty coffee technology. Entry level. Positions can be a good foot in the door. My mother interjected before I could. Elaborate. Perhaps you'll work your way up to management eventually. I took a sip of water, choosing not to correct her assumption. And where are you living? Now? Tia Elena asked. Still in that studio apartment? I have a loft now, I replied, omitting that it was in one of Portland's most exclusive buildings, with panoramic views of the river. Well, real estate in Oregon is so expensive, she said with a sympathetic cluck. I'll have to start somewhere. Throughout the first course, I kept my responses minimal, allowing my family to maintain their narrative about my life. I could feel Tio Raphael's frustration beside me, but he respected my choice to remain vague. As the main course was served, my father stood to offer a toast. He spoke at length about Sophia, her academic achievements, her professional success, her perfect choice of groom. Then, almost as an afterthought, and we are pleased that Mateo could join us from Oregon. I raised my glass along with everyone else meeting Sophia's eyes across the table. For a moment, I thought I detected discomfort. There, perhaps even guilt, but it was quickly replaced by her usual confident smile. The conversation shifted to Diego and his family background, his career, how he and Sophia had met. I listened with genuine interest, finding myself liking my future brother-in-law more than I had anticipated. Diego works for a coffee supply chain tech company, Sophia explained proudly. He's part of their roaster implementation team. That sounds interesting, I said. What kind of work do you do specifically? I help roasters integrate our platform with their existing systems, Diego explained. It's challenging but rewarding. Our technology is really transforming how coffee is sourced and verified from farm to cup. Something about his description sounded familiar, but I didn't immediately make the connection. Technology is changing everything, my father said dismissively. Though I still prefer to have a real accountant rather than a computer making decisions. About my money. It's not about replacing accountants, Dad. I found myself saying. It's about giving them better tools and more accurate information. He raised an eyebrow, surprised by my sudden engagement in the conversation. Exactly, Diego agreed enthusiastically. The platform I work with has actually reduced sourcing fraud by 60% in some regions because it ensures all parties have access to the same verified data. Now I was truly paying attention. Those statistics sounded very specific and very familiar. What's the name of your company? I asked, a suspicion forming. Trace. Coffee Collective, he replied. We're best known for our flagship product, Bean Trace. It's revolutionary, really. I was so excited when they hired me. 8 months ago, the table continued its conversation, but a roaring had started in my ears. Diego worked for my company that I had built from nothing. My $12 million failure. Diego was still talking, explaining to my confused relatives what supply chain transparency meant and why it mattered. The founder is this brilliant guy who created an entirely new approach to the problem. He's quite private, though. Most people just know him as MR, but what he developed is changing coffee sourcing across the country. He paused, a slight frown crossing his face as he looked more closely at me. I could see the gears turning as he connected my name, my initials, and my mention of working in coffee technology. Then his eyes widened and he whispered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Wait, you're MR, the founder. The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward me. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. My father froze with his wine glass halfway to his lips. And just like that, my carefully maintained worlds collided. Time seemed to stop as Diego's question hung in the air. The elegant dining room, with its crystal chandelier and ancestral portraits, suddenly felt airless, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out in that single moment of recognition. You're MR, Diego repeated, his voice stronger now. Mateo Rivera, you founded Trace Coffee Collective. I met his gaze steadily across the table, aware of every pair of eyes fixed on me. In that crystalline moment of truth, I felt an odd sense of calm. Yes, I said. Simply, I am. The silence that followed was profound. My mother sat perfectly still, her face a mask of confusion. My father's expression cycled rapidly through disbelief, shock, and something that looked suspiciously like recalculation. Sophia stared at me as if seeing a stranger. But that's a $12 million company, Tio Javier sputtered, breaking the silence. The bean trace platform is used by nearly every major specialty roaster in the country. 312 roasters in the United States, plus 42 in Mexico and 28 in Colombia as of last quarter, I corrected mildly. And our most recent ARR was actually $12.80 million. Tia Elena let out a small gasp. Cousin Isabella was rapidly typing on her phone, presumably looking up my company. My father had set down his wine glass and was now leaning forward, his accountant's mind visibly reassessing everything he thought he knew about his son. I don't understand, my mother finally said, her voice faint. You never said anything about founding a company. You told us you worked in coffee. I do work in coffee, I replied. I just didn't specify that I own the company. Diego was looking at me with a mixture of awe and embarrassment. I'm so sorry, he said. I didn't mean to put you on the spot like this. It's just everyone at the company talks about the founder like he's this mysterious genius. I never imagined. It's fine, I assured him. I've kept a low profile intentionally. Mateo is the CEO of Trace Coffee Collective. Sophia asked Diego directly, as if I couldn't answer for myself. He's not just the CEO, Diego explained clearly, still processing the revelation. Himself. He's the founder. He created the entire Bean Trace platform. Our CTO says his original blockchain architecture was revolutionary. He turned back to me. The company holds 6 patents based on your original work. 7. Now, I corrected gently. The 7th was approved last month. Cousin Isabella held up her phone. It says here that Trace Coffee Collective was named one of the top 10 most innovative food tech companies by Fast Company last year. Number 4, I nodded. We're hoping to crack the top 3 this year. My father cleared his throat. Mateo, perhaps you could tell us more about your company. It seems we've been uninformed about your professional achievements. There was a new tone in his voice, the same one he used when addressing successful clients or influential colleagues. It made something twist uncomfortably in my stomach. Actually, Tio Rafael interjected, a fierce gleam in his eye. I think what Luis means to say is that they completely underestimated you and are now realizing what a tremendous mistake that was. He raised his wine glass in my direction. 2. Mateo, who succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, except perhaps his own. The toast hung awkwardly in the air with only Diego, Rafael, and a few others raising their glasses. My mother remained frozen, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the edge of the table as if to steady herself. When you left Miami, my mother said carefully, you never mentioned starting a company. I didn't. Started immediately, I explained. I worked for another roastery first, learning the industry. The idea for Bean Trace came about 8 months after I moved to Portland. And you never thought to tell your family about this success? My father asked, an edge to his voice. I met his gaze directly. When have you ever asked about my work in any detail? The conversations we've had over the past 4 years have been surface level at best. You asked if I was still in coffee as if I was working at a Starbucks. Sophia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I saw you a year ago in Seattle. You never mentioned founding a company then either. You spent that entire coffee telling me about your promotion and your new condo. I reminded her. When you asked about my work, you changed the subject before I could get into any detail. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table again. The family narrative about me, the dropout, the disappointment, the cautionary tale, was crumbling before their eyes, and no one quite knew how to proceed. Diego, bless him, attempted to cut through the tension. This is actually amazing, he said brightly. I can't believe I'm marrying into the family of the guy who created the platform I work with every day. The roasters I visit consider Bean Trace to be revolutionary. $12.8 million, Tio Javier muttered, still stuck on the revenue. Did you raise venture capital? My father asked, slipping into business mode. Initially, I nodded. $750,000 in seed funding. then $5 million Series A and $18 million Series B. We've been profitable since year 2, so we haven't needed to raise additional rounds. And your ownership stake, he pressed. Dad, Sophia interrupted, looking embarrassed. I retain 48% controlling interest, I answered calmly. The venture firms hold 35% and the remaining 17% is split among early employees and our ESOP. My father nodded, clearly impressed despite himself. My mother had still barely moved, her social mask completely fallen away as she struggled to reconcile her perception of me with this new reality. So all this time, she finally said, her voice tight, while we've been worrying about you, thinking you were struggling in a tiny apartment with a dead-end job, you've been a millionaire tech founder. On paper, at least, I acknowledged. Though that was never the point. Then, what was the point? Sophia asked, something hard in her voice. To make us all look foolish? To prove us wrong? The point was to solve a problem that needed solving, I replied firmly. To build something meaningful. The fact that it became financially successful was secondary. Secondary? My father scoffed. $12 million is hardly secondary. For the Riveras, perhaps not, I said quietly. But for me, it was always about the work itself. My mother abruptly stood, her chair scraping against the tile floor. I need to check on dessert, she announced. Though the catering staff had been handling everything. All evening, she disappeared into the kitchen, her shoulders rigid. I should help her, Tia Elena murmured, following quickly. The remaining family members sat in awkward silence, the elaborate dinner now thoroughly derailed. Diego looked between Sophia and me, clearly sensing the tension but not fully understanding its roots. I have to say, he ventured, working for your company has been the best professional experience of my career. The culture is amazing and everyone is so committed to the mission of ethical sourcing. Thank you, I said sincerely. That means a lot. We work hard to maintain that culture as we grow. How many employees do you have now? Sophia asked, making a visible effort to engage. 138, I replied. We're opening a Miami office next quarter, actually. Miami? Tio Rafael perked up. Will you be spending more time here then? Some, I nodded. I'll need to be here for the launch and initial hiring. My father was watching me with a calculating expression. The specialty coffee sector is booming. Have you considered acquisition offers? We've received several, I acknowledged. But I'm not interested in selling. We still have too much work to do. My mother returned, composed once more, but with a certain brittleness to her smile. Dessert will be served momentarily, she announced. Mateo, perhaps after dinner you could tell us more about this company of yours. It seems we have quite a lot of catching up to do. Her tone made it clear this was less an invitation for sharing and more an accusation of withholding. The carefully reconstructed mask of polite society could not quite hide the hurt and confusion underneath. As the dessert plates were set before us, I realized that this revelation, while satisfying in some ways, had opened a Pandora's box of complicated emotions and damaged relationships that would not be easily resolved over flan and cafe. Dessert was a tense affair. Conversation occurred in stilted bursts with extended family members asking increasingly specific questions about my company. While my immediate family processed their shock in different ways, my father had shifted into networking mode, suddenly interested in every aspect of my business. My mother maintained a brittle smile, saying little. Sophia alternated between pride and something that looked uncomfortably like resentment. After dessert, as guests began to move to the living room for coffee, Sophia touched my elbow. Can we talk? She asked quietly. In the study. I followed her to our father's wood-paneled sanctuary with its leather-bound books and cigar humidor, a room designed to impress rather than comfort. Sophia closed the door behind us and turned to face me. Why didn't you tell me? She asked without preamble. A year ago in Seattle. Why? Keep it secret. I considered my answer carefully. Would it have changed anything between us if you had known? Of course it would have, she exclaimed. I would have been proud of you. I would have told everyone about my brilliant brother, the tech founder. The way You used to tell everyone about your brilliant brother, the college dropout. I countered. Sophia, our entire relationship has been defined by comparison. You winning, me losing. I needed to build something that was just mine, not measured against your achievements or our parents' expectations. She ran a hand through her perfectly styled hair, momentarily disheveling it. I never saw it as a competition. You didn't have to, I replied. You were always winning without even trying. That's not fair, she protested. I worked hard for everything I achieved. I know. You did, I acknowledged. And you deserved your success. But can you honestly say you've ever had to fight to be taken seriously by our parents? That you've ever been the disappointment? She was silent, unable to deny the truth we both knew. When I left Miami, I continued, I needed to find out who I was outside of the Rivera family narrative. I needed to succeed or fail on my own terms. And you succeeded, she said quietly. Spectacularly. Yes, I nodded, but not to prove anything to anyone else. That's what I need you to understand. Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door and our father entered without waiting for an answer. There you are, he said. All business now. Mateo, I've been thinking. Your Miami expansion presents some interesting opportunities. I know several roastery owners who would be valuable connections for you. We should set up meetings while you're in town. The swift transformation from dismissive parent to networking ally was jarring. Dad, I already have meetings scheduled with Panther Coffee and Vice City Bean. Our business development team has been planning this expansion for months. Of course, he nodded undeterred. But personal connections can open doors that formal channels cannot. The Garcia family owns half the coffee farms in Colombia. I could arrange a dinner. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully. But we already have direct relationships with those farms. They've been using our platform for over a year. My father looked momentarily thrown but recovered quickly. Well, there are other introductions I could make. The specialty coffee sector in Miami is tightly knit. Luis, Sophia interjected. Maybe now is not the time for business networking. My father frowned, looking between us. I'm simply trying to help. Mateo has built something impressive, and I have connections that could be valuable. The way those connections would have been valuable 4 years ago when I was starting out, I asked quietly. When I told you about my ideas and you dismissed them as a Portland fantasy? A flash of discomfort crossed his face. That was different. You were just starting out with no track record. Now you've proven yourself. And that's the only time I deserve your support, after I've already succeeded. Without it, the study door opened again, and my mother appeared. Her perfect hostess composure had slipped, revealing the emotional turmoil underneath. Mateo, she said, her voice tight. I think we need to talk. Sophia and my father exchanged glances. Then my father nodded. We'll give you some privacy, he said, ushering Sophia out. When the door closed, my mother remained standing, arms crossed defensively across her chest. Why didn't you tell us? She asked, echoing Sophia's question, but with a sharper edge. All these years, letting us believe you were struggling, barely getting by. Do you have any idea how worried we were about you? Were you worried, Mom? I asked gently. Or embarrassed? Color flooded her cheeks. That's an awful thing to say. Of course we were worried. You dropped out of school, moved across the country, barely communicated. And did you ever really ask, about what I was doing? Did you ever show interest in my work beyond assuming it was insignificant? How could we know if you never told us? She countered. I stopped telling you things when it became clear you weren't listening, I said. When I left Miami, Dad told me not to come back for help when my Portland fantasy failed. You both had already decided my story before I had a chance to write it. She sank into one of the leather chairs, suddenly looking tired. We wanted what was best for you. No, I corrected her. You wanted what you thought was best for me. There's a difference. We gave you every advantage, she said, a tremor in her voice. The best schools, tutors, opportunities. You gave me the advantages that would have helped you succeed, I replied. But I'm not you or Dad or Sophia. I needed different things. And now, You've succeeded without us, she said, a hint of bitterness in her tone. Is that what tonight was about? Showing us all how wrong we were. Tonight was about coming to my sister's engagement dinner, I said firmly. I had no intention of revealing anything about my company. That happened by pure coincidence. She was quiet for a moment, studying me with new eyes. You really have built something significant, haven't you? Yes, I said simply. I have. And you didn't think that was something to share with your family? I sighed. Mom, family sharing goes both ways. When was the last time either of us really shared anything meaningful with each other? We've been going through the motions of family for years, but the emotional connection has been missing. She flinched slightly at this truth. I always thought you pulled away because you were unhappy with your choices, that you were avoiding us because you were ashamed. I pulled away because every interaction left me feeling judged and diminished. I explained. It was easier to keep my distance than to constantly defend my path. And now, your path has led to extraordinary success, she observed, while we've been pitying you. I never wanted your pity, I said. Just your acceptance. The door opened again, and Tio Raphael poked his head in. Sorry to interrupt, but some of the guests are leaving. They want to say goodbye to both of you. My mother stood automatically, straightening her clothes and hair, the social mask sliding back into place. We'll continue this conversation later, she said, already moving toward the door. I followed her back to the living room where the extended family was gathering coats and saying goodbyes. There was a new difference in how they addressed me. Now, subtle changes in body language and tone that acknowledged my unexpected status. Tio Javier pumped my hand enthusiastically. We'll have to have lunch before you leave town, he said, pressing his business card into my palm. I have some investment ideas I'd love to discuss. Tia Elena hugged me with newfound warmth. We always knew you were special, Mijo, she said, rewriting history on the spot. As the last guests departed, only the immediate family and Diego remained. The atmosphere was heavy with unresolved tension and unasked questions. I should be going too, I said, reaching for my jacket. It's getting late. You're staying at a hotel? My mother asked, sounding genuinely surprised. Yes, the Seta. You could have stayed here, she said, a hint of hurt in her voice. I think we all needed some space tonight, I replied diplomatically. Diego approached me as I prepared to leave. I'm still mortified that I put you on the spot like that, he said. But I have to say, it's an honor to meet you properly. What you've built has changed how we source coffee. Her sincerity was touching. Thank you. And please don't be embarrassed. It was bound to come out eventually. Would you have time for coffee tomorrow? He asked hesitantly. I'd love to hear more about how you developed the initial concept for Bean Trace. I'd like that, I agreed, surprising myself with how much I meant it. Sophia appeared at his side, her expression still complex. I'll walk you out, she offered. At the door, she paused. This is a lot to process, she admitted. But I'm proud of you, Mateo. Truly. Thank you, I said, searching her face for signs of the sister I had once been close to before competition and comparison had driven us apart. That means more than you know. As I stepped out into the warm Miami evening, I felt both emotionally drained and strangely liberated. The carefully constructed walls between my past and present had crumbled, for better or worse. What would be built in their place remained to be seen. Back in my hotel room, I kicked off my shoes and collapsed onto the king-sized bed, emotionally exhausted. The ceiling fan spun lazily above me as I replayed the evening's events. A tangle of conflicting emotions swirling through my mind. Vindication, yes, but also sadness for the years of disconnect and uncertainty about what came next. My phone buzzed with a text from Tio Raphael. You were magnificent tonight. Breakfast. Tomorrow, my treat. I smiled and texted back my agreement. If anyone could help me process what had happened, it was Raphael. Sleep came fitfully. My dreams, a chaotic mix of past and present childhood dinners, where I was suddenly the CEO, roasting sessions interrupted by my mother's criticisms. I woke early, watching the sunrise paint the Miami skyline in shades of pink and gold. Raphael was already waiting when I arrived at the small cafe in Little Havana dressed in his signature artistic layers despite the early hour. There he is, he grinned, rising to embrace me. The talk of Coral Gables this morning, I imagine. That bad? I asked, sliding into the booth across from him. Elena called me at 7 a.m. to pump me for information, Raphael confirmed. Apparently, she's telling everyone she always knew you had something special. I couldn't help but laugh. 4 years of pitying comments, and now suddenly I was always destined for greatness. That's Miami society for you, Raphael shrugged. But enough about them. How are you feeling? I considered the question carefully. Relieved in some ways. It was exhausting, maintaining separate lives, but also uncertain. I don't know where things go from here with my family. That's up to you, Raphael said, stirring his cafe thoughtfully. You're in a position of power now, not just financially, but emotionally. You get to decide how much of yourself to share with them going forward. I never wanted power over them, I sighed. I just wanted acceptance. Sometimes we need the former to get the latter, he observed. Sad but true. After breakfast with Raphael, I met Diego for coffee near his office. Away from the family dynamics, he was even more impressive, sharp, thoughtful, and genuinely passionate about ethical sourcing. The implementation team has been pushing for certain features, he explained animatedly, describing challenges with the current system. I had no idea I'd be giving feedback directly to the founder. That's exactly the kind of information I need, I told him. The distance between development and implementation is something we're always trying to close. By the time we parted, I had gained not only valuable product insights, but potentially a friend. Against all expectations, my sister had chosen someone I genuinely respected and liked. The most difficult conversation came that afternoon when my parents requested I join them for lunch at their country club. The setting was deliberate, neutral territory where social conventions would prevent any scenes, yet firmly on their turf. We've been doing a lot of thinking. My father began once we were seated and the waiter had departed. And we owe you an apology. The words were so unexpected that I nearly dropped my water glass. We failed to see your potential, he continued. We measured your success by traditional standards and missed the innovation and vision you possessed. My mother nodded in agreement, though I could see this was more difficult for her. We were worried about you, she added, but we should have trusted you more. Their apology, while genuine, still framed my success as the justification for their acceptance, something I had earned through achievement rather than deserved. Inherently. Yet it was a start. I appreciate that, I said carefully, but I need you to understand something. My worth as your son is not tied to my net worth or professional achievements. If Bean Trace had failed, if I was working an ordinary job in Portland, I would still deserve your respect and support. My father looked momentarily taken aback, but my mother surprised me by reaching across the table to take my hand. You're right, she said quietly. And that's a harder lesson for us to learn. I think we've always defined ourselves by achievement. We raised you and Sophia the same way. It hasn't been entirely healthy for either of us, I pointed out. No, she acknowledged. Perhaps not. Can we start over? My father asked. Not pretend the past didn't happen, but move forward differently. I considered his request. We can try, I said finally, but it will take time. Trust works both ways, and we've all been hurt. Over the next few days before returning to Portland, I had several more conversations with my family, including a surprisingly vulnerable one with Sophia. Sitting on the beach near her condo, she admitted to her own struggles with our parents' expectations. You escaped, she said, tossing pebbles into the surf. I stayed and kept trying to be perfect. Sometimes I wonder which of us made the better choice. It's not about better or worse, I told her. We each found our own path. And for what it's worth, you're very good at what you do. So are you, she smiled, the competitive edge finally absent from her voice. When I returned to Portland, I carried with me a cautious optimism about my family relationships. The wounds of the past would not heal overnight, but we had at least acknowledged them, a necessary first step. The experience changed me in unexpected ways. At work, I became more visible, stepping into my role as the public face of the company I had built. I recognized that my reluctance to claim credit had been partially rooted in old insecurities that no longer served me. I also began implementing changes to my work-life balance. The company had become my whole identity partly because I had disconnected from other parts of myself, son, brother, friend. Now I began to rebuild those connections, not just with family, but with colleagues and with the broader community. 4 months after the engagement dinner revelation, I returned to Miami for the official opening of our East Coast office. This time, my parents and Sophia attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony, visibly proud as I spoke about our company's mission and growth. "You're a natural leader," my mother commented, afterward with genuine admiration rather than surprise. That evening, as we celebrated over dinner, I realized that while I had not received the validation I had craved from my family during those difficult early years, that absence had ultimately made me stronger. I had learned to trust my own judgment, to find validation in the work itself rather than external approval. "What's next for Trace Coffee Collective?" my father asked, now genuinely interested in my vision. "We're looking at international expansion," I explained. "Coffee systems in Africa and Southeast Asia face similar challenges with transparency." "And what's next for you personally?" my mother asked, a question she had never really posed before. I smiled, appreciating the shift in perspective it represented. "Finding balance," I said. "Honestly, building something meaningful professionally doesn't preclude building a meaningful personal life too. That's something I'm just learning." As I flew back to Portland the next day, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. For years ago, I had left Miami feeling like a failure, carrying the weight of my family's disappointment. Now I returned as a success by anyone's standards, yet with the wisdom to know that external metrics were never the true measure of worth. In my loft that evening, I stood on my balcony watching the rain streak down over the Willamette. My phone buzzed with a text from Diego sharing a photo of a new roaster successfully implementing our system. A second text followed from my mother asking about dates for my next visit. The journey of healing with my family had only just begun, but for the first time, I felt we were all walking in the same direction. I had spent years building a company that connected disparate systems, allowing them to communicate effectively. Perhaps now I could apply those same principles to reconnecting the disparate parts of my own life. Success, I had learned, was not measured by revenue or recognition. True success came from creating something authentic, something that aligned with your values and made a difference. Whether that was a company, a relationship, or simply a life lived on your own terms. Have you ever had to prove yourself to people who doubted you or found success in an unexpected way? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about overcoming obstacles and finding your own path. And remember, sometimes the people who don't believe in you are the ones who inspire you to prove them wrong. Thank you for listening, and I wish you courage on your own journey of self-discovery.